Hello, class. I just did 5 minutes of this video and something happened. It completely froze and then crashed. I have to redo 5 minutes. It's not that bad, I guess. But I once did an entire lecture and then had to do it again because the audio wasn't working. So today is day one of our J-term course. And we're going to be talking about the Romantic era of Polish literature, Romanticism. I'm going to open up a whiteboard, and with a little luck, it won't crash this time. It's doing it. Good. Okay. So I'm a little rusty on the whiteboard. I hope I can get it figured out again. So Romanticism. Romanticism was a pan-European artistic, literary, philosophical movement, and it's the 17th, 18th century, 19th century. Well, no, I guess it's mostly 19th century, mostly a 19th century phenomenon. It happens in different places at different times in European literature and art, but 19th century is basically what we're looking at, maybe part of the 17th. So within the European tradition, it was mostly a kind of reaction against the Enlightenment, against Enlightenment values. So the Enlightenment, we often think of as in only positive terms, that it was this, it was about reason, about valuing reason and science and that kind of thing. I mean, you get great scientists coming about in the Enlightenment period, like Huygens. He invented huge telescopes and observed, the solar system and whatnot. The galaxy, made several discoveries. Other scientists, come about this time because of Enlightenment values. People like Nietzsche was part of the Enlightenment. Marx Marx and his writing were products of the Enlightenment. I guess I'll take back Nietzsche. He was more, he kind of wanted to kill the Enlightenment. He was really kind of more of a romantic. He wanted to get rid of Enlightenment values. He didn't like the adherence to scientism and reason as much. So he was kind of a propagator of romantic ideals. So the Romanticism comes along, and artists and whatnot, they see this this strong adherence to reason and science and whatnot, and there's no place for the emotional, right? There's no place in Enlightenment values for love and anger and all these kinds of things, and so they wanted to create a space again for the emotional and the spiritual within the philosophical ideology of the time. Outside of Poland, Romanticism is very individualistic. It's all about the individual artist and a desire to describe the inner life of the individual. You get people like Lord Byron, right, who goes to Greece and becomes a national hero of Greece in their fight against Turkey, the Ottomans. His individual efforts, right, that becomes celebrated. In Poland, on the other hand, it's very much a kind of ideology of the nation. It's an ideology or philosophy of the group. For the Romantics, for the Polish Romantics, the best thing an individual can do is sacrifice themselves in the fight to recover the nation. Okay, so we have to consider the times here, right? So if you remember my lecture on Polish history from day zero, at this time, so 1790, this is late 18th century, Poland is not on the map anymore, right? 1795, the last partition of Poland happens, and Poland will not exist as a political entity until the end of World War I in 1918. So well over 100 years. And so the Romantics, you know, there's a long struggle to recreate the Polish nation again, to revive it. And the Romantics give voice to that effort, right? So it's very much a philosophy of self-sacrifice for the good of the nation. Not a phrase so much as a motto, maybe, that comes about this time is something called the Christ of Nations. And this is very important to study of Polish history, Polish literature. It's messianic, right? So this is a good word to know. This is a $50 word for a 5-cent idea. You'll hear me say that phrase a lot. You want to impress some philosophy professor or literature professor later on in your academic career, use messianic, right? Or messianism. So messianic, that comes from the idea of a Messiah. So Romanticism, Polish Romanticism is very messianic, right? So there is this idea of, I guess you could call it a philosophy, an idea of Poland being a Christ of nations. So, and you have to understand this is a very literal idea, okay? I mean, it seems metaphorical, but the Romantics thought of this in literal terms. So the idea is that Poland was crucified for to forgive the sins, I can't remember the exact language, but basically, in a way, in a way similar to the reason that Christ was crucified, for the salvation of humanity, Poland was crucified for the salvation of Europe, right? For the sins of Europe at the time. And it is basically a way to make sense of the tragedy of the partitions, right? You are this person who has this identity of being Polish. You have this national identity. You're raised speaking this language. You're told you are Polish, and yet you have no political geographical reality to hang on to, right? There are geographical names, but there are also those city names and those whatever other names, geopolitical names around you. You have a Polish word for it, but the people who run everything have either a German or a Russian word for it, right? And that's the word that is put on place name signs, right? Signposts are not in the language you speak. And so it's this strange limbo of national identity that you find yourself in. So how do you make sense of that? Well, this idea of Poland being sacrificed on the cross of Europe, right? That comes into the fore. It's the only way to make sense of this tragedy of knowing who you are, but not having anything to hold on to what you are, right? So, gosh, there was an idea I was trying to think of. Oh, yes. So what we have then, beginning in 1795, Polish literature, for a lot of Polish literary history, is a literature of exile. So after 1795, when Poland doesn't exist, but Polish language, Polish identity exists, and people are producing literature and art in Polish, it's not within the nation, okay? Because there is no nation. It is all a literature of exile. It is all an art of exile. For that 100 some odd years, even though you're living within the geography of Poland, you are not in Poland, right? You're either in Austria, Prussia, or Russia. And so you're basically writing a literature of exile. And then this becomes even more of an exilic, that's a good word, use that with your, literature professors later, it becomes an even more exilic literature when, after the failures of the uprisings, during this period, there are three major uprisings, mostly against Russia, that fail miserably. The Poles are slaughtered, and then they're either sent off to Siberia or they're exiled to other parts of Europe. A lot of them end up actually in Paris. An exilic community of Poles gathers within Paris, France, mostly. And the literature they create then is a literature of exile. It is exilic. It is a literature produced outside of the nation because you've been forced out of the nation, and your nation does not exist, right? So you have to keep all that in mind for these ideas, and the literature we'll be reading for Romanticism. And really, even today, much of Polish literature is flavored by this history. The three partitions, the three failed uprisings, and then really there end up being four partitions after when World War II happens, when the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany divide Poland up again, and Poland again is erased from the map. And then there's 50 years of communism where Poland isn't really free. And so again, until 1989, you really don't have you don't have a free literature. You have a literature that is being censored, determined by either a foreign power or a puppet power, the way Poles would see it. So yes, so that's Romanticism then. That's where we find ourselves. After the third partition, during these uprisings, this is the major philosophical move of Polish literature and art is Romanticism for a long time. It holds sway for a long time. So the three authors we read today, they're often called the three bards of Polish literature. They were the major figures in the Romantic movement. They lived around the same time. They did live at the same time, but they lived and died within, just a few years of each other. And there were many romantic authors. We can't read all of them, obviously. So we have to focus on these three major ones. So the first one we read is Adam Mickiewicz. If you know one author from Poland in Polish history, it's Adam Mickiewicz. He is the Shakespeare of Polish literature. Everyone knows his stuff. Everyone is expected to know a few lines of his poetry. There are statues to him everywhere. He is Poland, basically. Curiously, however, he was not born in Poland, or even what was Poland. He was actually born in Lithuania. So it's kind of curious. He's very Polish. He wrote in Polish, but he actually never lived. I wonder if he even visited. He must have been there at some point, but he never really lived in what would have been Poland proper. He was born and raised in the Lithuanian part of of course, none of it existed when he was born. He was born in 1798 and died in 1855. But if the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had actually existed when he was born, he would have been born in the Lithuanian part, and then never really spent time in what was Poland proper. But there are statues to him everywhere. The most important statue in Krakow is of the Mickiewicz. It's a landmark, really. So as a student in Lithuania, in Vilnius, actually, he got caught up in a secret student society called the Philomaths, which doesn't really mean anything. It was a completely harmless group. They just secretly got together to just talk about literature and philosophy. But in the Russian Empire at the time, you don't get together with a group of people secretly. And so he was caught, he was expelled, and then he was exiled to Siberia, and then later to Crimea, which you may have seen Crimea in the news recently because Russia annexed it from Ukraine a few years back. Eventually, he was able to leave exile, but he couldn't go back to Poland or Lithuania, and instead he went to France, and he actually taught Slavic literature at the Sorbonne in Paris. He eventually tried to raise an army to march on Poland against Russia, and in his travels, he went through the south of Europe, trying to find various Polish exiles and Polish immigrants, and he ended up catching probably syphilis. He probably died of syphilis, and he died in Turkey. And so his body was eventually returned to Poland, and it was buried in Krakow Cathedral in Wawel Castle. But yeah, his body remained in Turkey for a long time. There's actually another statue to him in Istanbul because he was rather popular in Turkey. So we did not read his most famous work, which everyone has to know. Pan Tadeusz, which was written in 1834. But we'll actually talk a bit about Pan Tadeusz when we go into a different era, because it's kind of central to this short story from like 100 years later. Just a little bit about Pan Tadeusz, though. It's set during Napoleon's march on Russia in the 1811 to 1812 failed campaign. So, you know, when I was growing up in the United States, all of our history classes, you know, we were taught that Napoleon was an enemy, right? That he was this great evil, right? Basically. But for Polish people, Napoleon is a hero. He was the only one during this over 100-year period who tried to do anything for Poland to recover its territory. And in part of his march through Poland, he liberated parts of Poland actually for a little while until he was beaten terribly in Moscow. And it's funny, the Polish national anthem, which I include on this module, actually has Napoleon in it. It says Napoleon or Bonaparte showed us how we are to conquer, or something like that. And so he's actually a hero to the Polish people. Even today, you still see like portraits of Napoleon in places. So, you know, history is never as easy as people would like it to be. I was always taught he was a bad guy. For a large number of people, he's a hero. And another, you know, so another curious thing about Pan Tadeusz is its opening line. It opens with Litwo, which means "Oh Lithuania." So it opens Litwo ojczyzno moja, so Lithuania, my homeland. So this is like the quintessential Polish poem, epic poem. All Poles know the first 4 lines or so to it, and many know the first like 24 lines. But it starts off with Lithuania, not Poland. So it's really a curious poem, a curious piece of literature to be the canonical text of Polish literature. So let's get to the short story we read from there, from Adam Mickiewicz. So the short story is Zawila. So what I'd like you to consider while you read this is its similarity to folklore. Okay, so during this time, folklore was very important all over Europe. It was becoming this important cultural product to study, to save, to record. So, for example, think about the Brothers Grimm in Germany. They basically were romantic authors and philosophers who they went out to the countryside and talked to peasants and recorded all of these fairy tales and folk stories from peasant people who couldn't read or write. So why did they do this? Well, at this time is when you really start getting an idea, a feeling of nationalism popping up in Europe. So it's kind of it's for us today. It just seems kind of natural in a way that we might think that there's always been a patriotism of some kind in people, but there's always been an idea of what a nation is. That nations are these fixed bordered places, and that one person on one side of the border is completely different than a person on another side of the border. But that's actually a very new idea in human history. For a long time, and in my history introductory video, I talked about this briefly. There was no idea really of what nation someone belonged to. There was tribe, maybe, right? But as far as like the nation was concerned, a peasant living in one part of Europe didn't really care who they were being ruled by, and most of Europe was peasant, right? So one peasant, it didn't matter to them that they were being ruled by a German or a Pole or a French king. It didn't matter to them. All they knew was that they had to do the work, right? And that's all that they were concerned about. They couldn't have cared less what land was changing hands. And if, on that little video I gave you, borders were always in flux for a long time in European history. So this idea that somehow a nation has these very strict borders is very new. It's a very new concept, and it's around this time, the Romantic period of European philosophy, that we start getting this idea of nationalism, right? Of nations being these distinct peoples, which is really kind of a false idea. But anyway, so part of the move to strengthen that idea of nationness was what, for example, the Brothers Grimm would do. There was this idea that what it really meant to be German, or what it really meant to be Polish, or what it really meant to be French, you could find in the peasantry. Somehow the people living out in the country, that they embodied what it was truly like to be a German or a Pole, right? So that's where you went to get the trueness of a nation. And so the Grimm brothers would go out and collect these stories. And a curious thing about this is that when they did this, when they went and listened, to an old grandma who couldn't read or anything, tell a story, and then they wrote it down, they basically killed the story. For hundreds, if not 1,000 years, these stories were all oral, part of the oral tradition. They had never been written down. And so they would change a little bit as time passed. It's the story starts out very, very small, and then the next generation it changes a bit, and they add to it, they take stuff away, they make things different in it. And so by the time the Grimm brothers start writing them down, these stories have gone through a dramatic evolution over those hundreds of years. But now that they're written down, they're actually dead. They're not going to change anymore, right? They are what they are now. And it's really kind of tragic in a way that this happens, right? Because the the spirit of the folk tale is that change, because society changes. We're still telling the story of Cinderella the way it was told in the way that the Brothers Grimm wrote it down in the 1800s. But the story of Cinderella doesn't really teach us much anymore, right? It can't, because we can't relate to the main character's struggles, right? It's completely foreign to us these days. But if it had been allowed to just to evolve the way it had been, the story would be completely different. It might still have something in common with us that we can relate to. So anyway, so that's my little rant about folklore. Why did I go on about this? Well, like the German Romantics and French Romantics, Polish Romantics all have the same idea about the peasants, and the same idea about folktales, that there was a truth about Polishness in Polish folklore. And I think Zawila really relates this, okay? So for example, what does folklore do, right? What is the purpose of folklore? Folk stories, fairy tales. And there's lots of different stuff, right? If you think about Hansel and Gretel, right? It's about avoiding strange people in the forest, or doing what your parents say, right? A lot of folklore and a lot of fairy tales is all about teaching children how to behave. But really, a very big part of fairy tales and a big part of folklore is about teaching women their place in society, making sure that women know where they belong, right? And that there are consequences to them misbehaving. It's terribly sexist stuff. If you read like the original Grimm Brothers fairy tales, women are treated terribly, right? They are servants, and they should know their places. So I'd like you to keep that in mind when you read Zawila. What is the punishment for Zawila, right? Why is she punished, right? She forgets her place, but then, and I don't want to give it away, but the ending is rather surprising. So I'll just say this much: even though Zawila forgets her place and is then punished, she maintains her love of nation, right? Even though it deprives her of her true love, whatever, she still upholds national values. Okay, so because she is a folk hero, right? She takes her punishment, and then also upholds the nation. So keep that in mind as you read, right? It's a very interesting short story. The next bard of Polish literature is Zygmunt Krasiński. He lived 1812 to 1859. So Krasinski is very interesting. He was actually born an aristocrat. He was born into an aristocratic family, very rich, very wealthy. He didn't have to do anything with his life. He would have been fine his entire life, even under the Russian, under the rule of the Russians. Or it was probably Russia. Yeah, in Warsaw. He was actually born in Paris, but early on moved to Warsaw. And as a young man, he started participating in liberationist activities, and got caught, and then was exiled. If he had been, any poorer, they may have executed him. But because he was an aristocrat, they allowed him to go into exile. And he ended up in Paris as well, along with Mickiewicz, and died there. He died in exile in 1859. So he has some deeply messianic ideas. Much of his work is rather mystical with a lot of religious overtones. But there's also kind of a strange, excuse me, proto-communist ethic to his writing. His major work is actually a play. It's a work of drama called The Undivine Comedy. So you may not be familiar with Dante, but Dante wrote the Divine Comedy, which was a three-part epic poem, and really the one that everyone knows is called the Inferno. So Dante, he describes this journey through hell, and then purgatorio, which is purgatory, and then eventually paradiso, or heaven. But the one that everyone likes the most is hell, because it's the most interesting place. People are like, in one ring of hell, people are forever have to be upside down in feces and whatnot. It is a really kind of a crazy, weird poem. But the Undivine Comedy is a bit different. It's all about lower classes rising up against their aristocratic lords. And so this is kind of, and there's some weird kind of religiosity, spiritual stuff going on as well. But it's strange that an aristocrat like Krasinski would write this, right? That he basically hated the class he was born into. He fought for the lower classes for much of his life. So the story we read here from Krasinski is called Cholera. From so this is again a very weird story. It's a little difficult to grasp. I really don't know, like any good piece of literature, there are a bunch of interpretations, but it's a little difficult to interpret. There's a lot of influence from Dante. There's this very weird, one thing about that I should have added to Romanticism in my discussion of Romanticism is their love of the Gothic, right? Why don't I put that here? So this is specifically Polish Romanticism. But one thing that they really loved was the Gothic, meaning dark, moody, weird kind of things. So, for example, Dracula is a work of Romantic literature, but more illustrative, I think, is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or whatever she calls it, Dr. Frankenstein's mom. I can't remember the exact title, but you know it. Her Frankenstein is like the epitome of Romantic literature. It's very dark, it's very Gothic. It's all these weird things happening, a bit of spirituality thrown in, and the Romantics love that kind of thing. The best place to set a story for a Romantic is an old ruined castle at midnight, where strange ghosts appear and stuff. So Gothic is very important. And Cholera is just like that. The main character, he's this tortured soul who can't find, he's tried. First of all, it's also a mystery. We never know what it is he did that he's so upset about. But he's done something early in his life. And so first he tries to live an ascetic, holy life, and that doesn't give him any relief. So then he goes the exact opposite, and he lives this very debauched existence for several years, and that doesn't give him any relief. And so he's just kind of lost. And so he's approached by this weird figure, and he takes him to this meeting of ancient judges. It's just the weirdest thing in like a cemetery somewhere. All these like figures from like ancient Egypt and Babylon, and throughout history they congregate all these weird immortal beings, and they're passing judgment on humanity. And another important thing to keep in mind is that this takes place in Vienna. So Vienna at the time was like the city of Europe. It was the major focal point of European civilization. The European city was Vienna for the time. But something else to keep in mind, this is part of my one of my questions on the discussion forum, is that Vienna was the seat of power for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was one of the partitioning governments, one of the partitioning empires of Poland. They took like the southern third of Poland away. So that's something to keep in mind as well, that Vienna represents Austria, which is this behemoth of an empire swallowing up smaller nations. So keep that in mind. And finally, we have Juliusz Słowacki, and he lived 1809 to 1849. So he is a very curious figure in Polish literary history. He was kind of a rival of Mickiewicz. He's known as the father of modern Polish drama. He really pushed the genre, did a lot of innovative things with drama, and it kind of brought it into the modern period. He had this kind of lifelong struggle against Mickiewicz. He never got as popular as Mickiewicz, mostly because, and I'm going to just make a little note of this. He uses a lot of pagan Slavic mythology in his work. So it's this mythology and these stories that, you know, a lot of Poles at the time were probably familiar with, and especially like Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians. They made, you know, it was still kind of, it was very esoteric anyway, even for Poles and Russians. But it was, you know, no one knows Slavic mythology ever. We all know Greek mythology and we all know Norse mythology, but Slavic mythology has never been the subject of a lot of study. But he decides that he is not going to play to the Western audience. Okay, people like Mickiewicz and Krasinski, they kind of played the game a little bit more, and so they were able to gain more popularity in the West. Słowacki refuses to do this. He makes these references to figures that people outside of Poland were completely unfamiliar with. There's no way a French person would have known what he was talking about when he talks about, you know, well, like when we read in Angeli, when we read about the shaman and what the shaman does. French people would have had no connection to that whatsoever, or Germans wouldn't have known what he was talking about. But he refused to play the game. He was going to write what he wanted to write. And so that kind of kept him from gaining popularity at the time. Curiously, though, he's actually had a bit of a renaissance in recent decades. People are really starting to study his stuff a lot more, and there's a lot of people arguing that really, if you look at his writing, it's superior to Mickiewicz's. And so there's a school of Słowacki apostles out there. But anyway, something else to keep in mind about him is, which also limited his popularity, was he was very pessimistic, much more pessimistic than other romantics about the future for Poles. He never, you know, a lot of romantics when they wrote, it was all about, you know, Poland regaining their independence, right? There was always this hopeful tone to their stuff. Not in Słowacki. There was, the Poles are big, you know, for him, the Polish nation was never going to be restored. And so that pessimism also kept him from being more popular among Poles as well. No one wanted to, you know, he refused to pander to anyone's tastes. Foreign readers found it difficult to understand him, and Polish readers were completely depressed by what he had to say. So, it really limited his reach, you know, his artistic reach a bit. So anyway, in the story Anheli, that's something to keep in mind. This pessimism, this pessimistic attitude about the future of Poland. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as you read Anheli. That's it for Romanticism. Our next topic will be a period called Positivism. So that be looking for that. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see my full head here, my full bold head. So yes, again, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I'll try to answer them. Good luck, and I hope you enjoy the reading. Students often like these stories because they're so weird. They are difficult to understand, but the weirdness is kind of entertaining in a way. It's kind of a torturous enjoyment to be gotten out of them. So I hope you enjoy them as well. All right, take care.